This is a teaching video for The Giver by Lois Lowry. I want to go over a little bit of annotation because it's been a while since we've annotated a narrative rather than a poem. So I'm going to do a little bit of color coding just to, spice things up. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to use my pen. Pen is still the most important tool for annotation. I can't stress that enough. But just to give you an idea, I'm going to use green for setting. I've done that for years because like grass is green, trees are green, right? Plot is yellow. I don't know, because like the plot is what happens, and that reminds me of history, and history reminds me of yellow. Like pages so old they've turned yellow. Okay, and then character is orange just because whatever. It's another color that won't make it hard to read. And then I'm going to use red for theme, but you'll see that I'm not going to like highlight it. I'm going to use it maybe to like bracket on the side. So I'm going to have this dictionary right next to me in case we get to a word that I think some people might not be familiar with. All right, here we go. So we're going to read the first page. It was almost December and Jonas was beginning to be frightened. No, wrong word, Jonas thought. Frightened meant that deep, sickening feeling of something terrible about to happen. Frightened was the way he had felt a year ago when an unidentified aircraft had overflown the community twice. He had seen it both times. Squinting toward the sky, he had seen the sleek jet, almost a blur at its highest speed, go past, and a second later heard the blast of sound that followed. Then one more time, a moment later, from the opposite direction, the same plane. All right, what do we got so far? This is the first chapter, and so it's really important to focus on setting. So in the first chapter of something, you need to annotate extra, right? Like I'm expecting more annotation in this first chapter, first couple chapters. There's going to be some chapters where you don't need to get new details because like we already know what this community is. But this is really important time to focus on character exposition and setting exposition. And exposition basically just means like description. Okay. So what do we get so far from setting? Almost December. All right, so we know it's winter. Something overflown the community, right? Like you made utopian communities, and this is some sort of a community. It didn't say the city, so that sounds a little bit funky. And then now we gotta note things about character. Jonas, first person. So what can I infer from this? I think it's fairly safe to say that if an author is giving you a character's name in the first sentence of the first page of the first chapter, that's the protagonist, okay? I might be wrong. I'm definitely not wrong, but I'm already going to make a note about that, okay? And I'm just going to use the space up here. Jonas equals protag. All right, so that's our main character. And what setting do we have so far? We know it's winter. Almost December. And then he was beginning to be frightened. So like, that's kind of interesting. That already has my interest. Why is he frightened that it's almost December? That's weird. We'll find out. All right, and then this is a little interesting detail about character. And the point is here, character details are not going to jump out at you if it's a good book, to be honest. They're not just going to say, Jonas was a careful boy. Jonas was a thoughtful boy. Because it's not a picture book, okay? And the way we learn about people in life is through what they do, what they say, and what they think when, like in this novel, you get to be in their head. So, what do we see? Beginning to be frightened. No, wrong word. And then he's defining that word, okay? And then he had been only fascinated. And then he's kind of going on this side note. So, what am I going to say here? I'm going to kind of like just mark this down. And I'm going to say Jonas. From what we know so far, we're going to say thoughtful. Careful with his words. Right? Like and does it say that? No, I have to make that inference to be like, that's kind of interesting. I don't know if everybody always sits there inside their own head and says, no, that's not the right word. Let me find the right word. Okay, so now we know that Jonas, this protagonist, seems to be a thoughtful kid, careful with his words. All right. First, he had only been fascinated. He had never seen aircraft so close, for it was against the rules for pilots to fly over the community. So I'm taking that as a setting detail. I don't kind of really care that much about the action, but like I think it's interesting in this setting, in this community, you'd never seen aircraft so close, against the rules for pilots to fly over the community. So I would say community rule, right? Just like your utopian community have like certain rules, certain laws that you came up with. I would say a community rule, planes can't fly overhead. I think it's weird. All right. But occasionally when supplies were delivered by cargo planes to the landing field over the river, the children rode their bicycles to the riverbank and watched, intrigued, the unloading and then the takeoff directed to the west, always away from the community. Intrigued. Do you know that word? If you do, cool. But some people might not, so I'm going to pause. And I looked it up, and intrigued, intrigued means interested and curious. And then I'm just going to write ADJ for short. So I know it's an adjective that's a describing word, right? Because it's not just to understand this text that I'm looking up these words, but so it's that I can gather new words for my own writing. So I can say, oh, I'm intrigued so far because I don't know what's going on with this kid Jonas and why he's scared of December. But the aircraft a year ago had been different. It was not a squat, fat-bellied cargo plane, but a needle-nosed single-pilot jet. Jonas, looking around anxiously, had seen others, adults as well as children, stop what they were doing and wait, confused, for an explanation of the frightening event. So that's another setting detail. Or you can say character if you're thinking of the whole community. But I'm going to say this setting this is some like weird like utopia or dystopia or something. Like everyone's scared of seeing a plane. Everyone's scared of seeing a plane. That's different. That's not like our world, right? Sometimes I go to the beach at Coronado and there's like a bunch of planes overhead all the time. It's no big deal. Then all of the citizens had been ordered to go into the nearest building and stay there. Immediately, the rasping voice through the speakers had said, leave your bicycles where they are. Okay, setting. So that means like in this community, it has like a weird loudspeaker thing. Community has a loudspeaker? Announcer? Right, that's not normal. In school, that might be normal. Yeah, you hear an announcement when we have an earthquake drill, but you don't hear that when you're just walking down the street in downtown Chula. All right. And then they were ordered. What is not like I want to order a double-double, but it means like they were like forced, basically. They were told. Instantly, obediently, Jonas had dropped his bike on its side on the path behind his family's dwelling. He had run indoors and stayed there alone. His parents were both at work, and his little sister Lily was at the child care center where she spent her after school hours. Because we just got more names come up, we have information about Jonas's family. And then I think these adverbs are really important. Adverbs can be a really good way to learn about a character. And I'm not going to write anything down, but I'm just going to put a little check mark because now we know, how does Jonas react to a scary situation? He reacts instantly and he reacts obediently. So it's maybe just in his nature to act quickly, instantly, and then to follow rules obediently. And then he dropped his bike behind his family's dwelling. That's kind of interesting, right? Do you go home and say, oh, yes, I'm back at my family's dwelling? It's kind of weird. So this place is weird. He'd run indoors, stayed there alone. His parents were both at work. All right, so now we know both his parents work and that he has a little sister, Lily. So that I'm going to write down at the bottom of this paragraph so that I don't have to make sense of these things again. This just helps me to understand, but now I need to write something down to summarize so that if I were to look at this, if I were to write about it, whatever, everything's already there for me. Okay, so I can say parents both work. Little sister Lily. Okay. She spent her after school hours. So then what do we know about Lily? She's school aged, but kind of young. I'm going to say in school. Like, she's old enough to be in school. So she's not like a little sister 4-year-old. She's a little sister, I don't know, maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever. All right. Looking through the front window, he had seen no people. None of the busy afternoon crew of street cleaners, landscape workers, and food delivery people who usually populated the community at that time of day. He saw only the abandoned bikes here and there on their sides. An upturned wheel on one was still revolving slowly. Isn't that a great detail, right? This is like a little vignette in and of itself, but I want to note some more setting details. Street cleaners, landscape workers, food delivery. And what do I notice too? Everyone gets like capital letters. So we know that these are sort of official jobs in this community. So I'm going to write something on the bottom. So then I just wrote some jobs in this community: street cleaner, landscape worker, food delivery. He had been frightened then. The sense of his own community, silent, waiting, had made his stomach churn. He had trembled. Wow. Okay, so trembled, that's a sign he was like really scary. He was really scared. He was frightened. All right. But it had been nothing. Within minutes, the speakers had crackled again, and the voice, reassuring now and less urgent, had explained that a pilot in training had misread his navigational instructions and made a wrong turn. Desperately, the pilot had been trying to make his way back before his error was noticed. Needless to say, he will be released, the voice had said, followed by silence. I'm going to just put quotes on this. It's kind of an interesting, it'll be interesting to see if every time this mysterious loudspeaker says something, they don't use quotes and they use just all capital letters. So we can tell this is like the voice. So I'm going to say the voice is almost like a character so far. Okay. We don't know what this job is called, but this seems to play a fairly significant role in Jonas's life, in the life of people in this community. Equals, I'm going to say sort of character. Okay. Followed by silence. There was an ironic tone in that final message. Do you know what ironic means? Sometimes this is one of those words that a lot of times people use and you might not quite know what it means. I'm going to look through this paragraph first. Grim? That might be a different one too. Okay. So here's a couple little quick definitions. Strange or funny because the situation is different than expected. So you can see I'm not going to write this all the way out because yes, I want to learn these words, but no, I don't want to take a million years. So when something's ironic, an ironic tone means kind of a tone that's humorous because the situation is different than you expected. So in this case, it says like, oh, he will be released. There was an ironic tone. So he's like, oh, like this voice is kind of thinking it's a little bit humorous that everybody had this big scare and it was just that somebody who was training to be a pilot messed up. And then grim is very serious or forbidding. Think about like death, like the Grim Reaper. Okay. Found it amusing. Grim statement. For a contributing citizen to be released from the community was a final decision, a terrible punishment, an overwhelming statement of failure. That's really important setting detail for what this place is. What is this place? Released. Right? He will be released. What does that mean? Does it mean killed? Killed? Shunned? Kicked out? We're not sure yet, but it's a terrible punishment, a final decision. So I'm betting it's either that they're killed or that they're at least like kicked out of their community forever. Even the children were scolded if they used the term lightly at play, jeering at a classmate who missed a catch or stumbled in a race. Jonas had done it once, had shouted at his best friend, "That's it, Asher, you're released," when Asher's clumsy error had lost a match for his team. He had been taken aside for a brief and serious talk by his coach, had hung his head with guilt and embarrassment, and apologized to Asher after the game. All right, and then one other thing from this paragraph, scolded, to scold, like regañar, is to tell someone in an angry way that they've done something wrong. And how does Jonas react to that? He felt guilt and embarrassment, and he apologized right away. And then we learned about another character, his best friend, named Asher. So I'm going to write that detail on the bottom. Best friend, Asher. And what do we know about Asher? He seems to do something wrong. Maybe he's not great at sports, or maybe it was just a little mistake. We'll find out more. All right, next page. Now, thinking about the feeling of fear as he pedaled home along the river path, he remembered that moment of palpable stomach-sinking terror when the aircraft had streaked above. It was not what he was feeling now with December approaching. He searched for the right word to describe his feeling. Jonas was careful about language. All right, so what we've already seen, now the author is like spelling it out. Jonas was careful about language, but I think we've got another word that you might want to define. Palpable. Okay, back to it. So that word palpable, one simple definition is just obvious and noticeable. Palpable also you could take literally to mean like something that you can touch. So if he has a palpable terror, it's like a very strong feeling of terror, so much that you could almost like hold it in your hand. All right. And that's not what he was feeling now with December approaching. I'm going to make one little plot note. Okay, so December approaching, I'm going to put that in yellow. We don't really know yet, but I'm just going to say like December event. Something is going to happen in December, and he's spending a lot of time thinking about it. All right. Jonas was careful about language, not like his friend Asher, who talked too fast and mixed things up, scrambling words and phrases until they were barely recognizable and often very funny. So we can see that, like, Jonas and Asher, so far from what we know just in these first 4 pages, are opposites. So maybe Asher is even like a character foil for Jonas. So I have my laptop here too, so we can see a foil is a character who's presented as a contrast to a second character so as to point to or show to advantage some aspect of the second character. So it's really like we learn about one character through the other being opposite. Character with opposite traits. Okay. Jonas grinned, remembering the morning that Asher had dashed into the classroom, late as usual, arriving breathlessly in the middle of the chanting of the morning anthem. Okay, that's kind of weird. So something else about their community, they have to chant some sort of morning anthem every day. We don't do that. When the class took their seats at the conclusion of the patriotic hymn, Asher remained standing to make his public apology as was required. So there's another rule. So students have to sing a morning anthem every day, and people have to make a public apology when they are late. I apologize for inconveniencing my learning community. Asher ran through the standard apology phrase rapidly, so they have to say exactly that. Still catching his breath, the instructor in class waited patiently for his explanation. The students had all been grinning because they had listened to Asher's explanations so many times before. I left home at the correct time, but when I was riding along near the hatchery, that's like a fish farm, the crew was separating some salmon. I guess I just got distraught watching them. I apologized to my classmates, Asher concluded. He smoothed his rumpled tunic and sat down. We accept your apology, Asher. The class recited the standard response in unison. Many of the students were biting their lips to keep from laughing. I accept your apology, Asher, the instructor said. He was smiling. And I thank you because once again you have provided an opportunity for a lesson in language. Distraught, is too strong an adjective to describe salmon viewing. He turned and wrote distraught on the instructional board. Beside it, he wrote distracted. So this is a job in the community. Kind of like teacher, but for some reason they call him instructor. And then another note, I just kind of like put a little orange line here so that I could come back to it if I wanted, but I'm just kind of noting, like, this is like a little character vignette, so to speak, right? A vignette is a verbal sketch. And this is basically a sketch that tells us what kind of person Jonas's best friend Asher is. Jonas, nearing his home now, smiled at the recollection, thinking, still, I did the little check marks. Sometimes I do that when I find like there's certain adjectives or adverbs or certain words that are really meaningful and help me to understand a character, understand a setting or whatever. I just use a little check mark. So I did orange check mark because this is a character detail about Jonas. He wheeled his bike into its narrow port beside the door. He realized that frightened was the wrong word to describe his feelings now that December was almost here. It was too strong an adjective. He had waited a long time for this special December. What is happening? Now that it was almost upon him, he wasn't frightened, but he was eager, he decided. He was eager for it to come. And he was excited, certainly. All of the 11s were excited about the event that would be coming so soon. But there was a little shudder of nervousness when he thought about what would happen, about what might happen. Apprehensive, Jonas decided. That's what I am. So now I'm going to go in here, and I highly recommend you get this learner's dictionary. All right. Apprehensive, adjective. So we're just going to say uneasy. Just feeling kind of about it. All right. And then just note, right, when there are asterisks like this in a text, that usually means that it's going to be like a setting change or like there's a big shift in time. So asterisks usually mark a change in setting, and that's like time and place. So it could be the same place, but flashing forward, flashing back, or it could be we're moving to a different place. So let's see. Who wants to be first tonight for feelings? Jonah's father asked at the conclusion of their evening meal. It's not called dinner. Weird. It was one of the rituals, the evening telling of feelings. Sometimes Jonas and his sister Lily argued over turns over who would get to go first. Their parents, of course, were part of the ritual. They, too, told their feelings each evening. But like all parents, all adults, they didn't fight and wheedle, that's kind of like wine, for their turn. Okay. So then I would say, because I'm kind of noting, what are the rules? What are the rituals? What's the culture in this community? Family members tell their feelings after dinner. All right, so parents don't fight about it, nor did Jonas tonight. His feelings were too complicated this evening. He wanted to share them, but he wasn't eager to begin the process of sifting through his own complicated emotions, even with the help that he knew his parents could give. You go, Lily, he said, seeing his sister, who was much younger, only a 7, wiggling with impatience in her chair. All right. So now we know that Lily, the younger sister, is 7 years old, and she's kind of impatient. Maybe that's pretty normal, maybe, for a 7-year-old. I felt very angry this afternoon, Lily announced. My childcare group was at the play area, and we had a visiting group of 7s, and they didn't obey the rules at all. One of them, a male, I don't know his name, kept going right to the front of the line for the slide, even though the rest of us were all waiting. I felt so angry at him. I made my hand into a fist, like this. She held up a clenched fist, and the rest of the family smiled at her small, defiant gesture. Why do you think the visitors didn't obey the rules? Mother asked. Lily considered and shook her head. I don't know. They acted like animals, Jonas suggested. He laughed. That's right, Lily said, laughing too. Like animals. Neither child knew what the word meant exactly, but it was often used to describe someone uneducated or clumsy, someone who didn't fit in. Okay, so this is huge. There are no animals here. I don't know why. I don't know when. We'll find out why. But they just say like animals, but They don't even know, like, there are no animals. All right. Where were the visitors from? Father asked. Lily frowned, trying to remember. Our leader told us when he made the welcome speech, but I can't remember. I guess I wasn't paying attention. It was from another community. They had to leave very early, and they had their midday meal on the bus. Okay, so there are multiple communities. Multiple communities. I know my N looks weird, but we're just going to move on. Mother nodded. Do you think it's possible that their rules may be different and that they simply didn't know what your play area rules were? Lily shrugged and nodded. I suppose. You've visited other communities, haven't you? Jonas asked. My group has, often. Lily nodded again. When we were 6s, we went and shared a whole school day with a group of 6s in their community. How did you feel when you were there? Lily frowned. I felt strange because their methods were different. They were learning usages that my group hadn't learned yet, so we felt stupid. Father was listening with interest. I'm thinking, Lily, he said, about the boy who didn't obey the rules today. Do you think it's possible that he felt strange and stupid, being in a new place with rules that he didn't know about? Lily pondered that. Yes, she said finally. I feel a little sorry for him, Jonas said. Even though I don't even know him, I feel sorry for anyone who's in a place where he feels strange and stupid. How do you feel now, Lily? Father asked. Still angry? I guess not, Lily decided. I guess I feel a little sorry for him, and sorry I made a fist. So let's mark this up just a little bit. I would say you could always just I will go like this. And this is all just kind of giving us information about what their family is like. So what do I notice most? That the dad is listening with interest. And this was the mom, right? She just asks questions. And then what does the brother do? Jonas, he asks a question too. And so everybody just asks questions, getting Lily to kind of think more deeply about what happened and how she was feeling. Until then, finally, there's still another question. And it wasn't until here, right after multiple questions, that now Jonas is like, I feel a little sorry for him. So this is really like a really interesting family dinner, interesting family dynamic, right? So I'm just going to kind of like add a little summary note to say what I'm noticing is that the mom and dad and Jonas all ask questions to push Lily's thinking and help her to build empathy, right? Like that's what they were doing. Instead of her being like, this kid was stupid, they cut in the line. They're having her kind of see things from the other child's perspective to get to the point where she says, I guess I feel a little sorry for him. Jonas smiled back at his sister. And I'm just going to write that he's a kind older brother, right? It could have been really easy for these family members to be like, Lily, that's so stupid. That was so mean of you. Like, why couldn't you see things from other people's perspective? But instead, they just kept asking all these questions. And then Jonas just kind of said how he felt. And then he smiled at her, right? Instead of being annoyed or impatient with his younger sister. Lily's feelings were always straightforward, fairly simple, and usually easy to resolve. He guessed that his own had been too when he was a 7. And I was just making a note here about that strange language and like using capital S for 7, that it seems like the title is your age, right? And we know that Jonas is an 11, so he's 11 years old, and Lily is a 7. All right. He listened politely, though not very attentively, while his father took his turn, describing a feeling of worry that he'd had that day at work. A concern about one of the new children who wasn't doing well. Jonas's father's title was nurturer. He and the other nurturers were responsible for all the physical and emotional needs of every new child during its earliest life. It was a very important job, Jonas knew, but it wasn't one that interested him very much. So I'm just going to note that. So that's nurturer job responsibility. So what does that mean? People don't just have their own babies? I'm just going to put a question. Maybe it'll get answered later. Why is nurturer a job? What gender is it? Lily asked. Male, father said. He's a sweet little male with a lovely disposition. But he isn't growing as fast as he should, and he doesn't sleep soundly. We have him in the extra care section for supplementary nurturing, but the committee's beginning to talk about releasing him. Release? That makes me think that release means to kill. Because, like, it's one thing to release someone from their job. That sounds like you're fired. But if you're releasing a baby, you can't fire a baby. So it seems like in this community, if people mess up too much or they don't grow enough, they kill them? I don't know. We'll look for more evidence. Oh no, Mother murmured sympathetically. I know how sad that must make you feel. Jonas and Lily both nodded sympathetically as well. Release of new children was always sad because they hadn't had a chance to enjoy life within the community yet, and they hadn't done anything wrong. There were only 2 occasions of release, which were not punishment. Release of the elderly, which was a time of celebration for a life well and fully lived, and release of a new child, which had always brought a sense of what could we have done. This was especially troubling for the nurturers like father, who felt like they had failed somehow, but it happened very rarely. So just to summarize, they kill babies and old people. So they kill babies if they're not growing enough, and they kill old people for being old? Well, father said, I'm going to keep trying. I may ask the committee for permission to bring him here at night, if you don't mind. You know what the night crew nurturers are like. I think this little guy needs something extra. Of course, mother said, and Jonas and Lily nodded. They had heard father complain about the night crew before. It was a lesser job, night crew nurturing, assigned to those who lacked the interest or skills or insight for the more vital jobs of the daytime hours. Most of the people in the night crew had not even been given spouses because they lacked somehow the essential capacity to connect to others, which was required for the creation of a family unit. Okay, we've got some interesting details here. So you have to be given a spouse by the community. This is like arranged marriage. They really don't get to make any choices. And the jobs seem to be all assigned, right? Night crew nurturing assigned to those who lack this interest or skills or insight. Interest, meaning they're not curious. Skills, maybe they didn't really work that hard in school. And insight, maybe they're not really deep thinkers. So if you don't work hard in school, you don't seem interested in much in life, and you don't prove yourself to be a deep thinker, this community will assign you a bad job. Maybe we could even keep him, Lily suggested sweetly, trying to look innocent. The look was fake, Jonas knew. They all knew. Lily, mother reminded her, smiling, you know the rules. 2 children, 1 male, 1 female, to each family unit. It was written very clearly in the rules. Lily giggled. Well, I thought maybe just this once. So I'm going to mark this in green because this is more like setting. More rules. Each family is given, make this look like a 1 male and 1 female child. So it doesn't seem like they don't have children. All adopted? This is kind of strange. And now we know, asterisk, another little change. Next mother, who held a prominent position at the Department of Justice, so like maybe a lawyer or judge or something, talked about her feelings. Today, a repeat offender had been brought before her, someone who had broken the rules before, someone who she hoped had been adequately and fairly punished and who had been restored to his place, to his job, his home, his family unit. To see him brought before her a second time caused her overwhelming feelings of frustration and anger, and even guilt that she hadn't made a difference in his life. I feel frightened too for him, she confessed. You know there's no third chance. There's no third chance. The rules say that if there's a third transgression, he simply has to be released. Jonas shivered. He knew it happened. There was even a boy in his group of 11s whose father had been released years before. No one ever mentioned it. The disgrace was unspeakable. It was hard to imagine. And so this is a little bit about Jonas's mom. So I'm just going to say, we know she's like a lawyer or a judge of some sort, and she wants to make a difference, right? Like she's not just in this job like, I don't know, because it pays more than being night crew, but she wants to make a difference, right? Because she felt guilt that she hadn't made a difference in his life. All right, let's keep going. Lily stood up and went to her mother. She stroked her mother's arm. From his place at the table, Father reached over and took her hand. Jonas reached for the other. One by one, they comforted her. Soon she smiled, thanked them, and murmured that she felt soothed. It seems like that's what they have to do, but it's very sweet. The ritual continued. Jonas, Father asked, you're last tonight. Jonas sighed. This evening, he almost would have preferred to keep his feelings hidden. But that, of course, was against the rules. Lots of rules here. I'm feeling apprehensive, he confessed, glad that the appropriate descriptive word had finally come to him. So that's why he's been thinking about his feelings all day, because he has to in this community. Why is that, son? His father looked concerned. I know there's really nothing to worry about, Jonas explained, and that every adult has been through it. I know you have, Father, and you too, Mother. But it's the ceremony that I'm apprehensive about. It's almost December. Oh, we're finally learning what it is. The ceremony. Lily looked up, her eyes wide. The ceremony of 12, she whispered in an odd voice. Even the smallest children, Lily's age and younger, knew that it lay in the future for each of them. I'm glad you told us of your feelings, Father said. Lily, Mother said, beckoning to the little girl. Go on now and get into your night clothes. Father and I are going to stay here and talk to Jonas for a while. Lily sighed, but obediently she got down from her chair. Privately? She asked. Mother nodded. Yes, this talk will be a private one with Jonas. So just to wrap it up, I just wanted to kind of color code that this is a plot thing that's upcoming, the ceremony of the 12, but then like green, it also tells us about the setting. So we know that there's some ceremony when people turn 12. We'll find out what happens. So if I really wanted to kind of keep track of things, like to sum it up. So to summarize, before I move on, Jonas, the protagonist, is apprehensive, uneasy about the upcoming ceremony of 12. He and his family share their feelings over dinner, and this convo, will continue in the next chapter. And that is chapter 1 of The Giver.